The next type of problem, well, basically, in order to solve most of these problems, you have to know about the unit circle. So let's go over what you need to do as soon as you get into the class. You draw a unit circle. You go like that. Remember, these are the railroads on the Monopoly set, right? You draw an angle that looks like 30 degrees. You draw this thing, which is in the middle, and you draw this thing up there. This angle is 45, and this big angle here is 60 degrees. You know that the sines and cosines are either going to be a half or radical 3 over 2, or radical 2 over 2. Now remember, the radical 2 over 2 is the sine or the cosine of 45 degrees. They're both the same, right? The sine and the cosine of 45 degrees are radical 2 over 2. Now, this other one, we know that radical 3 over 2 is bigger. Now, we look at this angle. Now, we know that the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. We look at this thing, right? And we also know that this is the x and the y, and the x corresponds to the cosine and the y corresponds to the sine. So we look at the 30-degree angle, and we see that the y value corresponds to the sine, and this is the smaller of the two, right? This is smaller than this. So this thing has to be a half, which means this thing has to be radical 3 over 2, right? So we could say something about 30 degrees. We could say that the sine of 30 is a half, which I think you memorized already, which is perfect. And the cosine of 30 is radical 3 over 2. Okay? Then we know that the sine and cosine of 45 degrees is this. And then for 60 degrees, it's opposite. The sine of 60 is radical 3 over 2. And the cosine of 60 is 1/2. Okay? Now you also have to remember in the quadrants. The first quadrant, everyone is positive. The second quadrant, the cosine is negative and the sine is positive because the x value goes this way, right? This is the x, this is the y. Down here, everything is negative, and over here, the cosine is positive and the sine is negative. You also have to know the definitions of secant, cosecant, and cotangent. Cotangent is 1 over the tangent. Cosecant is 1 over the sine, and secant is 1 over the cosine. Okay? And of course, the tangent is the sine over the cosine. Now, so if you're given an angle of, let's say, 210 degrees, and you want to know what is the sine of 210. So you look at the thing and you draw the 210 degree. You know, this is 180, right? And all around is 360, right? So 210 is this one, which means that it's a 30-degree angle here. If it's a 30-degree angle here, then you're in the 30-degree angle stuff over here, right? It's a 30-degree angle. So you know that the sine of 210 is going to be related to the sine of 30. So it's going to be something to do with a half. Now the question is it a positive or negative a half? It's obviously negative a half, right? Obviously, because it's the sine. This is in the fourth quadrant. This is in the third quadrant, okay? So if you're given an angle, you have to figure out what the reference angle is, and then you look at your little table that you have here, okay? So as soon as you get into the test, you should draw this, and you can use this as your reference for all the problems, okay? This is the unit circle discussion.